So yesterday we have been talking about the topic with Brother Miguel and Brother Joseph mostly on the preparation for the final days and for the coming of Jesus Christ. Okay? And when the final history of the world is written, one message will stand as the last great call of God to humanity. Okay? So only one message that will stand as the final great call of God to humanity. And that is the three angels' messages. We call it one message because the third angel embraced the messages of the first and second. So we have Revelation chapter 14 from verse 6 to 12, the entire scope of Revelation chapter 14 and 6 to 12, the three angels' message. Now these messages, they are not just symbolic phrases for Bible students to debate. They are heaven's bulletins to a perishing world, and they are God's final invitation, an appeal of love, and a warning of judgment. I hope you could hear me, right? Okay. And John, the writer of the book of Revelation, described these angels as they are flying where? They are flying in the midst of heaven. And their voices are ringing across the globe, reaching every nation, tribe, language, and people. In other words, to all the kingdoms of the world. Okay? And this is God's worldwide broadcast, His last offer of salvation before the curtain falls on human history. And the author, one of the Adventist author, I believe that all of us knows about her, Ellen White, described this as John saw a lamb on Mount Zion, and with him the 144,000 having his Father's name written where? In their foreheads. They bore the signet of heaven. They reflected the image of God, and they were full of light and the glory of the Holy One. So this is the characteristic of the saints that will be finally standing on the sea of glass on Mount Zion. Now, the subject of the 144,000 in relation to the three angels' message or messages are not just mere theology or theological. They are deeply personal, I believe, because they call for our worship, they call for loyalty, and they call for endurance, because they will decide the destiny of every soul, the eternal destiny of every one of us. This message. And this session here, we will be going to study together until under the three main sections, the 144,000 on Mount Zion, and God's last warning messages, and the final harvest. So under these three main sections, we will be touching on the three angels' messages. The first one here, the 144,000 on Mount Zion. John in Revelation chapter 14 opens with a vision. And I look, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him, how many? 144,000 having his Father's name written in their foreheads. Okay? So here is Christ, described here as the Lamb, and victorious, standing on Mount Zion. And with him, there's a special group, 144,000 in number, as described in Revelation chapter 7. And I heard the number of them which were sealed. That's the language of John in Revelation chapter 7. So 144,000 sealed from the earth. Their distinguishing mark is not a number in the membership book of the church, but the Father's name written where? Written in their foreheads. God's character that is impressed upon their minds. So that is when the Bible says that the Father's name written in their foreheads, meaning that God's character is impressed upon their minds. And why the Bible single out the 144,000? Mind you that there are two groups in Revelation chapter 7. We have the first group, 144,000 sealed, and there is also mentioned by John as the great multitude which no man could number. Okay? So there is one category that is numbered, 144,000, and there's another group which is no man could number. So the language is particularly clear. Numbered and no man could number. Right? So why the 144,000 are singled out? Ellen White explained that they had to stand with a wonderful truth right before the whole world and receive their opposition. In other words, by standing on this truth, they will be opposed. They must have Christ formed within them, the hope of glory. So the reason for opposition is their standing upon the truth and the character of Christ reflected upon them. Okay? Because the character of Christ is formed within them, the hope of glory. So these are the people who have faced the fiercest opposition, yet they stood firm, their loyalty unshaken. And furthermore, the Bible speaks about them that they sang a new song, or the new song. What is that new song? John heard their voices, and John says, and they sang as it were a new song before the throne, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. That's in Revelation 14 verse 3. Okay, so what type of song they were singing? Well, John did not describe us particularly what type of song, but John just saying that they sang a new song, as it were a new song. So probably John heard it for the very first time. Okay, so the new song is unique to their experience. No one else has passed through the exact trials they have endured. Now, when we look at the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as a church, since the founding, since the time, for example, way back in the year 1844. So those people that compose the church have unique experience at the time. Okay? Like for example, when they passed through the year 1863, there was a crisis. And what was the crisis at the time in 1863? The American Civil War. Yeah, that was a crisis that the church faced at the time. We don't face that now. Okay, the church didn't face that now. But in every time the church faced a different type of trials. So in other words, the new song, as we said here, is unique to their experience. And no one else has passed through the exact trials they have endured. It is a blend of the song of Moses, deliverance from earthly foes, and the song of the Lamb, that is deliverance from sin. So this new song that the 144,000 sung were a blend of the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. Okay? Yeah, in other words, we have to think about this thing. Every trial you faithfully endure today becomes a note in your eternal song tomorrow. Yes. And I have my own song. I can add note to that song every time I face trials and overcome them. Okay? You must have some unique experience, but remember that every trial you overcome, that becomes a note in your eternal song someday. There's music in the endurance. Remember that there's always music in endurance. Now, John describes them as well as when it comes to purity and loyalty in Revelation chapter 14, from verse 4 to 5, that these are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb, whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. So three particular things that John states here in the verses that we just read. Not defiled with women, for they are virgins. This is a symbolic phrase referring to a symbol of purity from false doctrines. And they follow the Lamb, meaning that is an indication of complete obedience. And they were without fault before the throne of God, meaning they were justified and they are sanctified. So these are the symbols and their meaning as explained here. Now, these are they, this is a note from Great Controversy, these are they referring to the 144,000 which came out of great tribulation. They have passed through the time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. So the time of trouble we're speaking about here is the time of the pouring of the 7 last plagues. And that is also the time when Jesus is not anymore in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary. In other words, that is the time where there is no mediator between God and man. And this is the experience that the 144,000 has to pass in the time of trouble, and such as never was since there was a nation. And they have endured anguish at the time of Jacob's trouble. They have stood without an intercessor through the final outpouring of God's judgment, but they have been delivered. And for they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. In their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne, before God. So these are the summary thing that we can find in 648 of the Great Controversy. Summary of the experience of 144,000. And in another quote by the same author, the vision of John that pictures the 144,000 as standing on Mount Zion, with the Lamb, of course, girt for holy service, clothed in white linen, which is the righteousness of the saints. But all who follow the Lamb in heaven must first have followed him on where? Here, on earth. Not fretfully, meaning fretful, that is, with a spirit of complaint not with that spirit. They follow the Lamb not fretfully or capriciously. Capriciously meaning like as the mode takes you. If your mode is good, right? You'll be good. What about if you are in the bad mood? Yeah. Some people are, I think every one of us has gone through such experience. Well, of course, there are some people who have this state of bipolarity. Okay? But those who follow the Lamb in heaven must first have followed him on earth, but in trustful, loving, willing obedience as the flock follow the shepherd. That's how we as children of God should follow the Lamb. Trust, loving, and willing to obey. Now let's move on to God's last warning messages. So we have taken up the 144,000 and discussing them in a brief and short explanation. And we have here the God's last warning messages. And after the glimpse of the 144,000, John sees the first angel flying to the midst of heaven. And you can find that in Revelation. So John speaks about the 144,000, and then he speaks about the three angels' message. The first one. The first angel calls us to worship who? To worship the Creator. The Creator, the one that made the heaven and the earth. Verse 7 of Revelation chapter 14, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of water. So this is the everlasting gospel, good news. This is the good news that surpasses or go beyond time. But notice that this message is coupled with a solemn reality. And what is that reality? The hour of his judgment has come. And this is not future. It's present tense. It began when it began. Of course, it began when, according to Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, Christ entered the most holy place in heaven for the cleansing of the sanctuary or the investigative judgment. That's when the time of the launching of the first angel's message. So the call is to worship him that made heaven and earth, and that is actually directly quoting the Sabbath commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. Okay? Worship him that made heaven and earth, quoting the Sabbath of the fourth commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. The first angel's message is at its heart a call back to the true Sabbath worship, a recognition of God as Creator. There are many people that talk about Sabbath. But which Sabbath day we are talking about here? Which Sabbath day we are talking about here? It is the seventh day, not the first day Sabbath. Right? That is the Pope's day. Yes. And that is the seventh-day Sabbath. The seventh-day Sabbath, we have, the way we observe that is not the Jewish Sabbath, because the Jews observe the Sabbath in a different way than the Seventh-day Adventists. But the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, is a call back to the true worship, a recognition of God as Creator. It is God's purpose that the truth for this time shall be made known to every kindred and nation and tongue and people. Whatever denomination you belong to, whatever religious group you belong to, or whatever religion you have, Islam, Buddhist, Hindu, there's only one message that God sent to all people upon earth, and that is the three angels' messages. When God intended to destroy the earth by the flood, how many messages He sent to the world? There's only one message, right? Yeah. Whether you believe that message, whether you hear not that message, there's only one message that God sent to the world through Noah at the time. So in other words, your manner or your behavior towards that message will not change God's purpose. God will not send another message just because you do not hear that message that He sent. God will never change the message because you won't accept that message. There's only one truth for this time, and this is God's intention that everyone, to every nation, and every tongue and people should hear that in the world today, men and women are absorbed in the search for worldly gain and worldly pleasure. Right? There are thousands upon thousands who gave no time or thought to the salvation of the soul. So many, brethren, that have no time or thought to the salvation of the soul. Do they have no time really, or their time were used in some other aspects? Brother Miguel stated yesterday that people have time to have their mobile, to look at their mobile, have spend plenty of time, so they have time. Okay, but that time was not used properly. So the second angels follow the first. The message is Babylon is fallen. Is fallen because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Well, what represents Babylon here? Babylon represents false systems of worship, a confusion of truth and error. Have you heard about relativism, religious relativism these days? Some people believe that this is the truth. Some people believe that that's wrong, right? So probably, in other words, people are setting their standard of what is right and wrong. Things that could be wrong to me might be right to them, or vice versa. Yeah. For many, it is right to be among the rainbow group, LGBTQ. Right? This is right for them, although the Bible stands against it. But for them, it is correct. So we have religious relativism, moral relativism. So we have here, the wine represents the false doctrines that intoxicate the nations. God's call in Revelation chapter 18, that's why it will be studied on next week, Revelation chapter 18, verse 1. God's call in Revelation 18 is urgent, come out of her, my people. So that call is even, it gives us an idea that there are sincere followers of God still in these fallen systems of religion. So God is calling them to come out. And His call is one of mercy. Live before the plagues shall fall. Like the children of Israel, they were called out of literal Babylon. God's people today are called out of spiritual Babylon. And so those who fear God today are heeding the message to withdraw from spiritual Babylon, and soon they are to stand as trophies of divine grace. Where? In the earth made new, the heavenly Canaan. In other words, if they withdraw from this false system by not accepting their doctrines, by not drinking or accepting the false doctrines, soon they will be standing as trophies in the earth made new. This is the heavenly Canaan. So the first and the second angels was followed by the third angel. And the third angel is giving the warning against the mark of the beast. Revelation 14 and verse 9 and 10, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. Now this is the most fearful warning in the Bible, the scripture. The mark of the beast is ultimately a sign of loyalty to man-made authority in opposition to God's law. And prophecy reveals that the substitution of Sunday for the Sabbath, for the 7-day Sabbath, will be the final test of allegiance. The whole world will be tested on this, and this will be the final test of loyalty or allegiance. And the testimonies tells us here that the substitution of the laws of men for the laws of God, the exaltation by merely human authority of Sunday in place of the Bible Sabbath, which is the 7th-day Sabbath, is the last act in the drama. And when this substitution becomes universal, God will reveal himself. God will reveal himself. Of course, the United States of America will have a role on this. So Brother Kevin next week will be touching this. Okay? So looking forward to that. So when this substitution becomes universal, global issue, God will reveal himself if he will arise. He will arise in his majesty to shake terribly the earth. He will come out of his place to punish the inhabitants of the world for their iniquity, and the earth shall disclose her blood and shall no more cover her slain. There will be terrible consequences that would result on this issue. However, in contrast, John identifies the faithful. They will be faithful even during this time. And that is in verse 12. Here's the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. So we have here, this is what? The description of those who stand in that final days. Here's the patience of the saints. They keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. So there is a threefold identity of the remnant that is described here in verse 12. Patience, meaning what? Endurance under trial, not giving up. In other words, we are not saying that there are some people that say not easily giving up, but in other words, that means that at the end it give up. Okay? But not easy. But this one is what? Not giving up at all. So that is endurance under trial. The commandments of God refers to the loyalty to his moral law. This is the 10 commandments in Exodus chapter 20. And the faith of Jesus, not just faith in Jesus, but the same faith Jesus had, that is total trust in his Father. Faith of Jesus and faith in Jesus are two different things. Okay? But what described here in Revelation 14:12, that is the faith of Jesus. The same faith Jesus had So what are the three identity of the remnant church? Patience, commandment keeping, and faith in Jesus. This is the last message, the third angel. This is the last message, and there are no more to follow. No more invitations of mercy to be given after this message shall have done its work. This is the final message today. And this is what the church is carrying to the world. This is the last message, and after this, no further call of mercy. And this is why it is given with a loud voice. Not just whisper, but it is given in a loud voice. In Revelation 14, it also described the blessed dead. Why they are blessed? I believe that all who died in Christ are blessed, right? Since the beginning of time, from Abel, they're all blessed. But what makes those who died under the third angel's message, what makes them special, those who died under the third angel's message? Written here in verse 13, blessed are the dead which died in the Lord from henceforth. Henceforth indicating a time indicator. In other words, those who died under the proclamation of the third angel's message. They are blessed that they may rest from their labors and their works will follow them. That means that even death cannot silence the witness of those who live for Christ. Their faithfulness continues to speak even when they are dead. Okay? So their faithfulness, their works do follow them. That's wonderful. Really wonderful. And the third here is the final harvest. Now, there are actually two harvests of souls referring to in Revelation 14. And these are the final harvest. Two harvests, but they're final. John, in vision, sees this harvest. The harvest of the righteous, according to Revelation chapter 14, from verse 14 to 16. This is the harvest of the righteous. And I look, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man. And there's no other than Jesus Christ is described here. And there was a command, thrust in thy sickle, and reap, for the time is come. The sickle represents what? This is an instrument of reaping, harvesting. The command was to trust the sickle, for the time is come. Now referring to the time when Jesus Christ would be, has ended his work in the heavenly sanctuary. And then he will come to earth in a glorious manner. So this is Christ's second coming in glory, reaping the harvest of the righteous. And those who have accepted the gospel are gathered where? Into his kingdom. They're all gathered into this kingdom. The time is come for them to be gathered into the kingdom of God. So this is referring to the harvest of the righteous. And there's also another harvest described here, the harvest of the wicked, but this is another type of harvest which is tragic and dreadful. Why? As described here in the next verse, or verses, gather the clusters of the vine of the earth and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. That is in the same chapter. So the image is really clear. The grapes here that were harvested were crushed in a winepress, representing a complete destruction of sin and sinner. They're crushed. And this is not, looks like cruel, right? But this is not actually arbitrary cruelty. Because this is the final and necessary act of a just God who has exhausted every avenue of mercy. Yeah, God's mercy will be exhausted soon. And when that happens, this will be the outcome. The wicked and the sinners will be crushed into the winepress of the wrath of God. So, and the time is not far distant when God will arise to vindicate his insulted authority. How will those who have trampled upon his authority endured his glory in the great day of final retribution? The voice of the archangel and the trump of God shall summon from the earth both the living and the dead to the presence of their judge. So God will, when his mercy is exhausted, then, because men continue to insult his authority. There will be consequences, of course. So living in the time of the messages on application, we are not waiting for these messages to begin. They are sounding today. They are sounding now. And we are living between verses 12 through 14 of Revelation chapter 14, between the final call and the harvest. That's where the time we are living. So close. Right? And here is what it means for us living in this time. Okay? Number one, we must decide our loyalty now. The final crisis, when it comes, we talk about that, the final crisis, when it comes, will not change our character. It will only reveal what character you have. And even in some common trials, in some common crises in life, when it comes, that is the revealing of our character. But remember, every crisis actually will not change our character. This, especially the final crisis, will not change it. But it will only reveal which side we are. Number two, we must proclaim these messages boldly. They are not for pastors only, but every believer is called to share them to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And we must prepare to stand without compromise. The saints in Revelation 14, mentioned in Revelation 14, they endured because they hold Christ's character sealed in their mind. And that's the reason they were opposed. Abel was opposed by his brother Cain because of what? His vindication of the character of God. Persecution in the final days will not come because we initiate violence. There are people actually that initiate violence, and then when the consequences follow, they will say, oh, we are oppressed. No. But this is different in a religious crisis. When we stand for the truth, Bible truth means we are referring to Bible truth. When we stand for that, opposition will always come. Okay? Unlike the crisis, some people stand against vaccination during the pandemic, they were opposed. Sometimes they were oppressed. But that's totally different issue compared to the crisis that we are talking in the final days. So the 144,000 are the saints here, redeemed from the earth. They endured because they hold Christ's character sealed in their mind. There was an illustration, a story during, in the time of Ellen White, for example, and the early Adventist pioneers. They called that time as California Gold Rush. So men risk everything to find gold. Some gave up halfway, others found fake gold, but few struck the real thing and held on it until the end. So the message of the three angels are heaven's gold. But unlike earthly treasure, they will not fade nor rust. They are worth holding onto, even if the whole world mocks or persecutes you. We hold this heaven's treasure. So, brethren, the three angels' messages are not optional adds-on to the gospel. In other words, we talk about the gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And when we speak about three angels, do not treat the three angels' message as just adds-on to this gospel. They are what? They are part. They are not adds-ons. They are the gospel for this final hour. The everlasting gospel is wrapped in a call to worship, a warning to flee from false system, falsehood, and an appeal to remain loyal at any cost. We have a sister. We have a sister. When I was in South America, in British Guyana, and she's 104 years old today. Okay, she's 104. And every time I went to visit her, when she explained the three angels' message, just very simple, He said that if you will not accept the 7-day Sabbath, then you will be in a fallen condition. And if you continue in that fallen condition, you will receive the mark of the beast. That's how she explained the three angels in a nutshell. It's truth. Okay? So this is not an adds-on to the gospel that many people are talking about, but we treat this as the final gospel for these final hours. The everlasting gospel that is called to worship God and to remain loyal at any cost. Okay? So, everyone should ask themselves today, are you worshiping the Creator in a way He commands? Have you come out fully of Babylon's falsehood? Are you prepared to stand when the test comes? That is in the future yet. But of course, there are trials that we have to pass until we reach to the final test. So these are the questions that we need to understand when we talk about the subject of the three angels' message. And let us choose today to be among those who follow the Lamb whithersoever He goeth, who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, and who will stand one day singing the new song on Mount Zion. May the Lord bless you.